Good afternoon and welcome to episode 11 of Inside Out, a monthly webcast where Thinka's co-founders and respective CEO and CEO, Ben and Lee, talk through all the weird and wonderful, hard and human parts of business and leadership. This month we're exploring when high performers fail as leaders.
I've worked with organizations of all shapes and sizes, and some of the best insights I've collected is of the person that absolutely knows that they want to be a leader, but they just can't transition from that technical expert mindset. But they may want it, but with that want comes the ability to learn new skills, learn new ways of working, and to unlearn some things that they maybe historically been doing, because the natural tendency for this person might actually be, well, it's worked for me, so it'll work for you. And I think that is a real challenge to navigate. The research from the World Economic Forum actually says there's only about 8% of those types of real high performers out there in the world. And I've always said that the real high performer band is around 20%. Maybe it's my optimism bias that comes in there, but these people are quite rare. And their value to the organization has historically probably been in their value network, how they can create value for the organization or for the people around them, whether that be through really complex problem solving, whether that be through innovating on new design, whether that be through really sophisticated execution from strategy to ops. But they have been more of the hands, the doer, the knowledge, the keeper of all brains trust. And I reckon it's just important to consider, if we have an expectation for that person to move into a leadership role, then we need to consider that the way that they work and how they validate their own performance is going to move with it, and that will come with its challenges. But before we jump into what some of those challenges might be, you've got to ask yourself the question, do they actually want to move into a leadership role?
I think the biggest thing that tripped me up was that my expectations were too high. So I think as a high performer, you go into a leadership role, and weirdly, for whatever reason, you think the team think the same way you do, their output is the same, or they can achieve that standard if you set it and guide them toward it. But I think the biggest thing I learnt was to flex on that and to understand that. And this was a bit of coaching advice I was given early on, to be fair. I didn't come up with this myself, and it changed the game. And it was like, stop thinking, 100%, think 80%, because you can coach the rest, through good quality control, constructive feedback conversations, and stepping into spaces where you're empowering the work. You can get that, but don't expect it from the outset, because what that does is ends up, one, causing you to micromanage. So you're checking things 3 times. You're probably being overly prescriptive when you're briefing in a piece of work. You're probably checking in far too often. And that can create this feeling of micromanagement, which is disempowering. And that in turn obviously has the very effect on the team that you're trying to avoid. They're not going to reach their potential. They're not going to seek out that higher standard and that path toward that, because they're like, what's the point? I'm never going to get there. There's this kind of relentlessness that's coming through that leader, and I'm never going to live up to that expectation. So why bother? So I feel that flex around expectations is really important, because generally you're going to be learning too as a leader. You're going to be learning how to give feedback, how to coach, how to motivate, how to stay optimistic in times of crisis. All of these things are skills that you're learning, and you want to have permission to fail as well. I will say it's the hardest thing I've ever done, is moved out of a specialist role and into a leadership role. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that. It was the hardest thing. I don't know, parenthood's pretty hard too, I will say, but leadership isn't that dissimilar, because a lot of it you can't learn in books or through models or via theory. It doesn't matter how many Brene Brown podcasts or leadership guides you read, you're never going to get there through being book smart. It is a lot of the street smarts that have to come into it, and a lot of making mistakes. And if you're a high performer, you don't generally like that. You're used to being, kind of the pinnacle or the outperformer and the person that can't be touched because they're exceeding expectations.
That moment in time where they realize, oh my God, I haven't got it all. I haven't got every single leadership skill I thought I had, can be a real challenging one. So if we are going to move someone who was a really high performer, technical expert into a leadership role, and they have agreed to go on the journey, then you also need to be there once they've said yes and they move into the role to be the person that maybe holds them accountable to the way that we now work and the way that we are now going to validate what good work actually looks like. So it's really great that we can talk about making mistakes and failing, and really it always is just the first attempt in learning, FAIL. I always like people to have that front of mind when they think about how they can really just work with failure and not see it as a bad thing, but the fact that I actually got in there, I had that tough conversation, it didn't go well, but that's not going to stop me from doing it the next time. I'm just going to go around again, try a few different things, try a few new strategies, and also honor that everyone is actually different, receives feedback a little differently. As we know, with someone that has been that technical expert has moved into leadership, the ability to give robust feedback, constructive feedback, is more their game rather than the cheerleader style of feedback. So we've got to be able to, with this person, if we are their peer supporting them, or maybe their leader leading them, have those accountable conversations.
There is a tendency towards impatience with high performers as well. So there probably needs to be a bit of a tempering around the speed with which other people work isn't going to be the speed, with which you tend to work, or potentially the way you process information and learn. So a tempering of that is really important. And then adjusting those expectations. I've already spoken about that, and just flexing on those a little bit. It doesn't mean that you sanction underperformance, but it does mean that you're realistic, understanding that majority of the workforce is made up of that middle band, that, solid to good performer. So empowering that middle band is the role of the leader, I think, not kind of going around in circles with underperformers, which is where we can get wrapped up a lot of the time in trying to move the lowest band, which is about 4%, according to some work that's been done by Culture Amp. But if we spend all our time in that space and we're not spending the time to move the middle band, we're kind of missing the point, because you're going to get your best results in moving the middle band. This particular cohort are really susceptible to burnout. So I think in addition to being about growing and extending their leadership, we need to be thinking about the psychological safety in which they're growing that leadership. So
Do we know why they have a higher tendency to burn out? Like, what's the piece around that? Is it they kind of go into a hyper mode because they've always been a high performer and now they just want to do that again? So they're working overdrive to get there? Like, what's the go?
The research suggests that because they're used to that one pace, that kind of that high drive, there's usually a kind of a bit of an overachiever in there, or potentially they're neurodivergent too. Sometimes someone with a ADHD, for example, they're hyper in a lot of their specialist skills. So it's just regulating that tendency to go all in, because that's generally how they're going to want to, I don't know, I'm speaking for me. When I first entered leadership, you kind of have this bizarre expectation that you're just going to kind of nail it in 6 months, but you learn pretty quickly that you just never really understand it, because you learn something new. Well, sometimes every day, but more kind of broadly and holistically, you learn something, kind of those aha moments come in every year of leadership, and you evolve as a leader, and who you are in that first 6 months as an early stage leader is not generally a good indicator of who you're going to become, because you don't know what you don't know.
I don't think you ever really nail it within the leadership space, because it's like, oh God, there's something new to learn. I think this is the moment we feel like we've got it all. All of a sudden, we are that person getting exposed on social media because we're still doing it like we were 20 years ago. And it's like, you've got to keep thinking and learning about people, because we change, society changes, environment changes. And there's this real trend at the moment in organizations of that middle band of management is starting to become smaller, and with the likes of technology being able to enable more routine management style of tasks, the actual leadership hat that we need to wear as someone that's moving into leadership is becoming more and more important, because there isn't a tendency to have a lot of real task managers, or there might not be in the future as well. That flattening is really impacting that. But I say that because I am getting to a point, doesn't sound like it, I know that. We've always talked about leadership versus management. That has always been a thing. And you're either got a little bit of both, or you're really strong in one or the other, this person's natural tendency when they come into a leadership role is they're probably going to have a more competence level around management because they're probably doing a lot of those things
Yeah,
in their
task
old role.
orientation.
Quality control, task management, getting stuff done, all the things that come with, management style because they're probably self-managing most of the time. So they didn't need a
Yeah.
lot of that. But the leadership piece, and that is the growing need, is also in leadership skills. Motivate the team, move towards vision, execute strategy into design, don't do it all myself, actually inspire the team to do it to get there, drive a values-based culture. Some of the more challenging ones for this person.
Organizations have a tendency to kind of pigeonhole what leadership looks like historically, but we're moving into an age where we need to understand that it's not just the loud commanding voice in the room or showy assertiveness or being thick-skinned, that there's much more nuanced leadership styles that are available to a range of people now. So not only do we kind of have to support our early stage leaders and make sure that they do have that truth teller in their corner, we also need to broaden our idea of what the leader looks like as an organization as well, and really reach in and look for those deep strategic thinkers and look for those people who are excellent collaborators and connectors across the organization, because leadership doesn't have to look one way. It's very multidimensional, and our organizations are better if we have all those types of leaders in the mix.